Hello, YouTube OakLife peoples. We have Chris and Greg, Greg and Chris. There's been a debate. It is not Chreg. You don't say Tris. It's Chris and Greg. Chreg. What would our three names be? Creedness.
That sounds inappropriate.
It is. That's very bad. Today's episode is brought to you. Trigna? Trigna.
But it's not CH, you said. Yeah. We don't say cha-cha.
Trigna. Okay.
I think Grigna.
That'll be the three of us. So Grigna here today to talk to you about a few different things. Today's episode is brought to you in part by The Brevet. They have a new album out called Legs. Check them out on all music streaming platforms. And Joshua Harris. Yeah, that guy. We love him. So, yes.
And who is Joshua Harris?
Oh,
right?
That's a great question. Who is Joshua Harris?
Great segue. So on Sunday at church we talked about the word purity. And a lot of folks have like pretty substantial experience with that word. There's this thing called purity culture, which has its roots in Christian sexual ethic that's very rigid, and a lot of it was popularized by our friend Joshua Harris, who wrote a book, I think in the 90s, called I Kissed Dating Goodbye, and it was basically about abstinence, and I think I actually never read it, but what I know of it is that the idea is you don't kiss your husband or wife until the wedding day. I think.
Oh, wow.
It is a good thing I didn't grow up a Christian.
Yeah,
that would be.
But
yeah.
Nonetheless.
Was he a pastor?
He was, yeah.
Okay.
And he wrote the book really young too. But so don't quote us on the kissing part. But the heart beneath it was about staying pure for marriage, and purity meant you can't do anything sexual and until you're married. And of course, it's a husband and a wife. It's a heterosexual marriage, and that culture being popularized brought a lot of pain to people. Because this very natural thing of being a human being sexual, became a source of shame and something that felt dirty or impure. And so we kind of talked about that as one of the ways purity has been misunderstood. And at the end of service, Gina shared like a brief moment about how this has played out in her life a little bit. And so as a way to continue the conversation about purity, we invited her to share. And part of that is Gina's now with OakLife as a spiritual formation intern. So you'll be seeing not really more of her because she's already doing this work, but it'll be more formalized, made more official. So week one of our internship starts next week, and we thought we'd get her talking about the word purity. An easy one to start with.
Yeah. Wow.
But Gina, on Sunday afterwards, you shared a story of how you've interacted with this word. Could you share that again with us if you're comfortable?
Yeah. I didn't want to share, but if you've heard any of my sermons, or especially the one that I gave in June, I talked about how I can't not be vulnerable. It's really hard for me to not be vulnerable. And I just felt really, I don't know, I just felt like I needed to say it for whatever reason. That maybe I thought somebody or people in the audience needed to hear it, but it was just that, I didn't grow up a Christian, but I grew up raising my daughter. I guess, so she'd be the one who grew up in a Christian home, per se, and going through life with your child like that when it comes to the sexual purity is really tough because, I thought that I knew exactly what the Bible was saying back then in that regard, and I kind of fell into what was happening with her youth group, and which was purity culture. And when she started asking questions, I was just, I pursued that direction for her, even though that was not a direction she necessarily agreed with. And so it was a lot of pressure that I put on her, and encouraged her to get a purity ring, bought it for her, and I don't even, she didn't understand, but of course she put it on her finger. And she's in therapy now, not for that, but she's in counseling, and she's open and in public about it, so I can say that. But one of the things that that I wanted to do while she was in therapy was bring up some of the ways that I've harmed her as a parent, sort of like making amends. And I don't think that that's like a thing for parents, and I think it's really beautiful. If my parents were to apologize to me for some things that they did, I would think that would be absolutely incredible. So she was over for dinner one night, and that was one I was like, wow, as I grew at OakLife in understanding purity in a different way, I'm like, wow, I probably caused some damage there. And we were at the dinner table, and I just told her that I was sorry that I pressured you. I'm sorry that I put the direction of your sexuality this way, and I hope that you can forgive me, and I'm really sorry I did that, and it needed to come from your heart and a place from you, not a place from me. And she just started crying, and I felt like in the room at OakLife there were probably others who've maybe been youth pastors or other parents who maybe sort of not fell for this, but wanted to direct their child in a healthy way with good intentions, of course, but harm their child along the way. And that's why I shared.
I thought it was really powerful and vulnerable of you. And we're all works in progress, right? We're all trying to figure stuff out. And I don't think your intentions were bad. It's kind of like you have intentions and you live them out, and then you realize what was helpful or fruitful or good and what wasn't.
Right.
And so a lot of us, maybe with the conversation on purity culture, or this is the way churches and Christians have been talking about it for a while, we were realizing, wait, these things aren't as healthy as we thought they were. Maybe the intention was providing a framework that's protecting people. I think that's the good intention of purity culture. The downside, the negative part, is that it makes people feel gross because they're sexual beings. And in reality, being able to connect with somebody sexually can be a beautiful gift from God. Sure, there's ways to do that with wisdom and in love, and there's also really unhealthy ways. But one of the things we talked about on Sunday was that purity should be about, the question should be, what is love? What is loving to do? What is loving for me in this relationship? What is loving to me and the person I'm with? I think that's the higher ethical standard, not is this thing dirty or clean? Because it's not those things. I think those are the wrong categories to talk about sexuality, really. So I was really grateful that you shared that. Yeah,
I was gonna say, like, if you do find yourself apologizing to someone that you need to apologize to, like, I don't feel, bad or guilty or like I was a horrible mom because I did that. Like, so I think definitely checking yourself in that regard, like making sure that you know that you were doing the best you could with what you had at the time, that, you were loving your kid, because truly I was loving my kid. So don't, feel bad about that in that sense. But it's very healing, I think, to apologize and make amends with other people, even your children. Or even something that's 10 years old. Oh, do you remember 10 years ago when we had that conversation and I was like, you can't do that, like you're whatever. Any kind of situation like that, like it's never too late to go back and make amends or apologize.
Right. That's good. You had mentioned, having the good intentions and doing the best with what you had, which I think is a really, really good point. Oftentimes, 100% of the time you can't go back and fix things, right? But let's just play with that a little bit. If you were to go back and do things different now that you have the experience and understanding that you have around your faith and these concepts, how would you have done, how would you have approached your daughter and the ideas of purity now with what you understand now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that with the word purity, so many people focus on like sexual purity, but the Bible brings up the word pure in so many other ways. So why not focus more on those ways, and knowing that anything that I would say, I want you to be at a place where you're doing what you're doing out of what's pure and good for you, not necessarily what I think it is. So if it is that person that you meet in high school, even if I disagree with it, if that's coming from your heart and where you're at, I want to honor that. And God, I would more push her in having an intimate relationship with God and encouraging that. And I did show her and tell her all the, beautiful things about God, and that he wasn't shaming her or condemning her. So that's one thing. I get props for that, right? But it was so much like, don't until you're married. Like, you can't, it's wrong. So I wouldn't say it's wrong anymore. I would want her to be acting out of her purest place, which is where you're at in that moment for, like what Chris was saying, what is loving to you and to yourself and to the other person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's good.
And I would not say, let's go get a purity ring, because what is that even?
I have no idea.
So.
Didn't even know what that was until you mentioned it.
You've never heard of the purity ring?
Mm-mm.
Wow. It's a band, too. Did you guys know it's a band?
Is it?
And they're not Christian.
There's a band called Purity Ring.
Yes.
There's a South Park episode.
A band.
No, a musical
band. Wow.
band.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know.
But they're not Christians.
Interesting.
It's not a Christian band. Yeah, it's like
they're not pure.
Yeah, it's like EDM or something. I don't know.
Wow. Well, we got into EDM today.
There it is. That's how you know it's real.
Well, thank you, Gina. This is a conversation. There's so much to it. Lots of people. I had a few people come up to me afterwards. Just, I could tell, have a lot of history and experience. Some of it negative with how this word's been used, and there's a lot of lingering questions. Like, we can't solve it, and a lot of how you walk what is pure for you in love is very circumstantial. So for some people, it may look like abstaining sexually until marriage. For other people, it might look differently. And I think that's okay. I think God doesn't leave us in any of those contexts. So, yeah, I guess that's it. Maybe a final question is, if somebody, Gina, this is kind of putting Gina on the spot here, but if you were talking to somebody who has been shamed or carries a lot of guilt with regards to how the word purity has been used, what would you want them to know, or what would you hope for them? What would you tell them?
Well, I know shame doesn't come from God, so I think that would be my first thing. And there are plenty of verses that back that up. Like, I don't know it by heart, but it is about not being condemned. Like, Jesus doesn't condemn you. And there is no shame or condemnation in Jesus. I think it's Romans. So if that's true, and it might not feel true, that's okay if it doesn't feel true, but it is true. So I think that is like one thing. And then I would, like I said to Greg, or what I said earlier about, like, there's so many other verses about pure in the Bible, and purity really is just a refinement. So if someone has shame or guilt over that, maybe they can see it as like that was a refining process that they went through in the sense of becoming who they are, and there is no shame in that. And I would say, think about what kind of decisions you want to make as far as like sexual purity. Like, I'm a lay counselor, so I tell my clients we make decisions out of emotion mind, or logic mind, or wise mind. And a lot of, like, before you make a decision in whatever, like, let's just say having sex or any kind of whatever sexual interaction, are you doing it because it's logical? Are you doing it out of emotion? Or are you doing it because it's wise? And I think that can be a good.
I could just see someone saying, hey, I have a proposition for you, and this is logically sound, and here's the data. So what do you think?
I know. I don't know. It can be kind of a compass.
Yeah.
If you're overwhelmed and you're not sure what to do. Because, I don't know, I've made a lot of decisions as a sexual being out of my emotions, okay? And there's no shame in that. But I'm saying now I would maybe, well, I'm married, but I would maybe use, like, what's wise? What's good for me?
It's good.
It is. Yeah, that's good stuff. I do like the idea that both of you have talked about purity being way broader than the concept of sex.
Mm-hmm.
I had a buddy tell me that he hangs out in the city and there's a lot of dirty people there. And he said it's not external dirty. They got a lot of dirt in here.
Mm-hmm.
And he was sharing how he appreciates being in a community where people aren't dirty here. And it's less about the things you do, but just more about how you present yourself. If your love is authentic and you are authentic in love, then sounds pretty pure.
Yes.
So just co-signing that.
That's basically, what I'm trying to say, but again, streamline.
We're
not
team.
streamlined.
We're team. Let's go.
Yeah, and everyone's on their journey too, you know. It's just like there's places that my daughter has been and it hurts, but it's not going to be real or authentic for her unless she goes through it. And that has to be her journey, and we can't give anyone their journey.
Right. Bars.
That's good.
And even if you do feel shame, I think that not saying that, I mean, we know shame isn't from God, but I think it's okay to feel shame because then that's how you work through shame, is to feel it. And
that should be our next word. That's the next one.
Right?
Shame. Next video.
Yeah, you have to move out of shame. You can be in it. You don't want it, but to move out of it, you got to feel it and be in it. And there's no shame in that.
Bars. Look at you with the double entendres. Feeling it.
Cool. Well, want to wrap us up, Craig?
My wrap-ups are quick. Our wrap-ups are, hey, we're done.
Oh, we were supposed to have a wrap-up. If you need to talk more...
Go ahead and wrap us up, Chris.
Cool.
Do we want to say what spiritual...
Oh, no. We'll do that later.
Oh, okay.
So, teaser, we're going to talk
Dang,
more
I was
about
prepared.
spiritual
Next
formation
time.
in a minute. Just hang around. You're going to hear some cool stuff. But that is... This conversation, like I've said a couple times, brings up a lot. If you have specific questions or you need to talk to somebody, you just want somebody to listen to you, or you need prayer or whatever it is, I hope that OakLife can be a community of safe people. And there's lots of spaces to talk, whether it's in a life group or it's with safe people who are lay counselors or pastors or whatever it might be. You're not alone. I think that's all. Anything else we need to say?
If you need people, we got people.
Yeah.
That's it?
That's it.
All right. Peace out. Like, subscribe, comment. What do you want to see more of? Craig. Or what was our name again?
Chreg.
Craig.
Craigna. We out of here. Peace.